Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining the latest LinkedIn Live of Gain Advisors. We're here today with Amy Infante Still and Carlos Lugo, both Gain Advisors. Amy, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Awesome. Good to see you again. And Carlos, how's it going?
Doing fantastic. Couldn't be with a better group here to get this going today.
Awesome. Great. Well, again, thanks everybody for taking the time. This is going to be a fun conversation, combining both commercial strategies and real estate and assets and technology, right? And how it fits all together. So, Amy, I'm just going to, go right in and ask you, why do strong hotel assets still underperform in today's market, and what are they missing?
Well, I think it's just, pretty simple. Like great assets don't operate themselves, and you really need a strong system, a commercial operating system, which I've been talking a lot about. We put a lot of rigor and discipline into figuring out the investment in an asset and what it should do and how it should perform pre-purchase or pre-transition with a new brand, things like that. But then when it comes to actual operating in a commercial fashion, it falls short a lot of times. And I think, that fragmentation really can kill the momentum. So when sales, marketing, revenue optimization, distribution don't all sync cohesively and have aligned goals, that's really where things can fall off the tracks. And it's not, a lack of effort, I don't think, from what I'm seeing out there. It's just purely a lack of alignment. This is so new for so many in the industry. And I think we talk a lot about it at the above property level. There's a lot of organizations I'm seeing that are focusing on building commercial and aligning their organizations. But at the property level, I see that really there's a gap there and a true need.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. And from a technology perspective, Carlos, you've been working, for the last decade or two in technology in hotels. How does technology contribute to that?
Yeah, just a short 2 decades, but yeah, I mean, Amy hit it dead on. I mean, in many cases, what happens is that the asset, a lot of times, isn't the issue, right? Is the operating model sometimes is really constrained by the tech stack, and so what we see a lot is a lot of legacy systems that create this data fragmentation, where leadership really lacks a single source of truth, right? So they don't know what to believe in terms of the data. So making real-time decisions sometimes becomes problematic. Also, I would say that the commercial teams are making decisions in lagging or like inconsistent data, right? Or in silos. So there's no real-time insights, and that's problematic. Um, and then the tech often reflect historical decisions, right? And so not the current asset positioning or target guess, but in the sense of that, in order to get results, right? Even a premium asset has to behave like or behaves typically like an average, right? Or one because like the system cannot execute the strategy. And so I'm saying all that to say, and I know that's somewhat a lot, but to Amy's point, right? If these systems are not talking and the data is fragmented and there's no strategy on what that looks like, this is when it becomes problematic. So technology then becomes this silent constraint per se.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's a shame, right? Because if you have a great asset, it really is a waste of that great asset to not implement a great commercial and technology strategy, and even an aligned one that both combines commercial and technology, the best of the best, with people, processes, and systems. So, Amy, is there a time that commercial strategy matters more than the asset itself per se?
Well, actually, I think that's a no. I guess my simple answer is, commercial strategy needs to be the foundation,
Yeah.
right? No matter what. And I think that Most assets right now are in a market where it's either there's a supply, oversupply, there's a lot of sameness. It's hard to distinguish, from the competitors,
Yeah.
and the markets are soft. So those three key things are what we're seeing consistently with customers. And, it's either, I guess, to boil it down, competitiveness or commoditization. And a lot of times it's both. And so commercial strategy is the differentiator in that, I think, and making sure that the teams are fully aligned. It also happens during brand transitions, which I mentioned before, or management changes, or post renovation, post acquisition. That's where I see assets really bleeding value the most, and where it's just so important that, so I don't see a single market or hotel that cannot operate without some kind of a commercial model and methodology in place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it doesn't really matter if you have a poor asset in your portfolio. You can always turn things around, I suppose, and even make the asset greater with that commercial strategy.
Yeah, I mean,
Carlos,
yeah, actually, just to sidebar on that,
yeah,
we get called a lot. I get called a lot with properties that are underperforming for various reasons. And sometimes it is about the product not being quite up to standard. And there are absolutely things like having an aligned strategy, can still move the needle. It's really understanding what the purpose of the asset is and the why behind it. What does the investor want from that asset? And that varies a lot too. And a lot of times I think teams don't have visibility into that they need to have.
yeah, that makes sense. Carlos, how does the tech stack truly reflect the asset and positioning in that regard? Is there any positioning that you can play around with the tech stack? How important is that?
That is an interesting question, because I mean, to what Amy is really saying here is, the moment you define who you want to be in the market, I think is where the technology becomes the enabler or the blocker, right? And so, for instance, like luxury versus select service versus like a lifestyle type of asset, right? And depending on the brand and geographically where it's at, will make a huge difference too. But each requires a different tech architecture, not just the branding, right? And so, like, I wouldn't expect the same to be in a luxury hotel and what I am expecting to get as technology and accessibility than I will have in a select service per se, right? And so I will say that many hotels just run commodity tech stacks, regardless of the positioning, which really creates commoditized outcomes. And we see that a lot because of brand. Like, the brand will have some sort of standard, right? But these brands may have 30 flags. So by its nature, you're really managing by exception at this point, because you have 30 different brands. So what, is really difficult, to say, well, we're, the red M guy, and we, all 30 of these flags, or 32, whatever they have now, must have all of this same thing, although we're maybe luxury, premium, select service, etc. So I guess one example I will say is, that it all depends on, do you want to have a high touch experience? Let's use that. Maybe your CRM needs to have more or personalization engines or integrated PMS guest profiles. Those things will give you more of a personalized touch. Whereas, the other one could be more of a rate driven asset that needs a strong RMS and a channel optimization. So those things right there will define, how do you position your asset in some ways. But I will say that a lot of times the asset strategy doesn't meet the technology strategy, and because it may be driven by a brand agenda. So the bottom line for me will be is, if your tech doesn't reinforce your positioning, the market won't see the difference. So I just really think that we need to be cognizant of how we want to position the asset. And I use this all the time when I say, look, if I go down to let's say Florida. I live in Florida, right? And most people want to come to Florida. There's a price to pay to come to paradise, right? So if you're going to spend $500-600 a night to stay in a hotel, let's say a luxury brand, there's some expectations of what I want to get from that $600 a night, right? Versus I'm going to be paying $200 a night to stay, on a rinky-dinky asset. Maybe my expectation shouldn't be that much of what I'm paying for, right? So we have this thing of associating cost and location to what the technology should be. And a lot of times we don't look for what type of experience we want other than I'm paying this much. I mean, I know I went a little on there, but I think that those two a lot of times just don't meet depending on what your master agreement with such brand is if you're not an independent and you have a straight vision of what you want that to be.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Just a follow-up question on that, because I think a lot of the people that are listening right now, whether they're an owner or a management company or from the brand side, might be concerned with this, right? So how do you ensure that you have a high touch experience or whatever how can you create a customized or a personalized tech stack for your asset, even if it's flagged with one of the larger brands, and have a commercial strategy that aligns with your ICP, with your revenue management strategy? Is that still possible as if you have one of those larger flags on your property?
If the question is for me, I think the answer is yes, right? There are all types of technologies out there now that allows you to overlay some of those personalization things you want to accomplish for your guests, whether it's pre-arrival, during your stay, post-arrival. What type of communication style do you want? What type of upsell do you want to do throughout? And if you think about a mobile-first type of approach, which I think we all should now, everyone carries, I don't know how many of these now. I carry like 3 or 4 everywhere I go. So, we live in this mobile-first type of environment. What type of high touch, right, accessibility and engagement you want, I think all is possible. And it requires, in some cases, a little bit of investment, but it all depends what you have there today and what is your integration platform or strategy looks like.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Amy, where do you think that hotels are losing the most revenue nowadays, right? Is there any one point or maybe a top 3 that you can name of saying, hey, this is what I see in the last, I think it's 25 years, right? That you've been running Kitco?
Not quite.
Okay, 20.
About 20, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Over exaggerated.
Aging.
All good. I won't give it away. Is there any pinpoint, revenue spot that you can say, hey, this is what I see the most revenue loss today?
Well, I think overall, from a commercial viewpoint, it's indecision and missed follow-up. Okay. So, from a sales and marketing team, slow response times, no pipeline discipline. Really, the leads are kind of dying quietly. And I think a lot of that has to do with, there's the technology and the systems to support the team. It's not lack of talent or effort necessarily. It's truly not having process and not having the technology to support at the property level. A lot of times I see, like, even for us, marketing is driving traffic, but conversion can kind of be an afterthought when you're talking about top of funnel. It's really hard. Like, we do a lot of education on top of funnel marketing and what that process looks like. And there's just a lack of patience for that, which creates this, missed follow-up. And a lot of times people will just decide not to invest in top of funnel. Let's just focus on what's coming in, and then you get a soft market and down economy, and then everybody's wondering why they're struggling with revenue. Really deep down, I think they know, but it just becomes like, oh my goodness, what just happened? I think that also there's like this feedback loop between the sales activity that's happening and revenue management and their pricing and positioning. So that's where there becomes a gap in the commercial strategy. And then over reliance on OTAs, that's huge. I think nearly every property customer that I'm working with today is relying so heavily on OTAs, and that's a big push. Is how are we shifting direct business their way? So I think those are kind of the biggest issues. And when we don't have a fully aligned commercial strategy, all of those things, it feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like it's not one big thing that's going to cause, like it's not dramatic, right? But it's going to happen over time. And it becomes dramatic when there's a huge shift in the market. And that's usually when people start making decisions and saying we need to do things different because they feel enough pain. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I understand that because I've been there before too. Like I've waited and waited and waited and then felt the pain deep enough to make a decision. But I like to learn from my mistakes, and I like to tell other people about my mistakes so that they can learn from them and turn my decades into days for themselves, right?
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's very interesting what you're saying, especially around the follow up. Carlos, is there any tech stack or any tech recommendations that you can do that say, hey, these are some solvable problems? What Amy is saying, what she learned from her experience.
Well, they're all solvable, I think, right? And I typically make recommendations without truly knowing the actual problem, right?
Yeah.
And so, and from my experience, I will say that what Amy's talking about is, that is the big problem to solve. Everybody wants to get to the point where we're doing a lot more direct bookings, and the ones that are doing it well, God bless them, because that over reliance from OTAs that Amy's talking about is a real problem. The other side of it is that I look at it from once you're in house, right? What are the systems doing? How we're leaking revenue? And these areas, revenue just isn't lost in pricing. I don't believe that. I mean, there is some of that. It's lost in the gaps between systems in my mind as well. So, like, I'll give you some examples of that is like poor integration between PMS, POS, RMS, and some other systems. When you start to see that the sub-optional pricing decisions happen, but then you get into lack of purchasing and receiving integrations, right? What you're purchasing and what you're receiving in that inventory, where is it, right? There's revenue leakage right there. Like the fact that we're ordering something and we don't know what arrived versus what we ordered and where it is and how it's being used, those are big problems. And they happen to every property. And so lack of inventory controls is a revenue leak. Amy alluded to weak channel management, and then lack of. One of the things that I see also that I will categorize somewhat as a revenue leakage is the missed opportunity of, we have all this guest data, but we're not really upselling or using it for repeat value. And a lot of times what happens is the hotels underutilize their own data, and then they're sitting on this value, but they're not putting like any operation behind it to basically say, let's orchestrate the things that we're not doing so well with all this data that we have. And then I would just say to Amy's point that it's so true is a lot of times what happens is lack of process or rigor on that process. Because a lot of times what I like to do is not only review the stack, but review your processes. If we got broken processes, right, let's fix those first before we get to automation. I don't want to get to automation without really solving the process problem, because we're going to be solving for the wrong thing. And so I want to get the right system in there for you at the right price that is going to optimize what you're doing. But we also have to have the visibility to make that decision. And if we don't have the data to base it around, then we're just making decisions blindly. And so I'm saying all that to say that lack of orchestration a lot of the times is why we are leaking revenue.
Yeah. Don't you see, Carlos, that teams are moving so fast. Like we have to move at the speed of business. And so I feel the pain of these leaders because and my theme this year has been slow down to speed up. it's like we almost need to take a step back and just really evaluate the entire process and system and be able to identify the root cause of the problem. Because I think we sometimes misdiagnose things as more of a people problem than a structure or process issue. And so I think that, like, slow down to speed up, and commercial leaders need to be really good project managers today, or they need to find a really good right hand to be kind of a orchestrator, like you said.
Yeah, well, one more thing to that too. You're so right on that, being good project managers, and I want to hit on something real quick. Matt, a lot of times when you take on some of these engagements and you're project managing, right? We bring a project management hat to the table. There's a misconception that if you're doing the work remotely, that is or from afar, that is not as rigorous as if you were on the ground. And I think that's a false narrative. The reality is that the leaders on the ground have to hold their leadership accountable to drive these projects, right? And set right expectations and realistic timelines. And what I see a lot is that there's a lot of drift, or scope creep, if you want to call it that, because they're very sensitive to how they want to go about treating or dealing with this project, which is mission critical in a lot of ways. But they're really just trying to be super tactful when it's not time to be tactful. It's time to be assertive, and it's time to drive results.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm living it right now. In fact, implementing a CRM because a global sales organization does not have the infrastructure to operate as global sales, but we are implementing that technology infrastructure and the business rules around using that technology. So absolutely hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Awesome. I actually saw a report. I think it was yesterday, of one of the technology vendors out there, and they analyzed the email inbox of one of the properties that they work with for the last 90 days. And I think for about the emails that they analyzed, 40% of those emails were not answered, and requested an RFP, requested had a revenue intent, and they were simply not answered. There was no follow up. And their solution is more about, okay, we automate or draft certain replies, and then the sales director or coordinator can just hit the send button. But I thought it was so interesting, and this is a hotel that is actually tech forward, tech savvy. So think about all the properties that don't have that mindset and are losing so much more than 40% of those emails with revenue intent. So I think that's a great combination of having both a commercial mindset of, okay, losing out. We're trying to minimize the revenue leakage on miles travel, for example, and enabling technology in order to supply and contract that travel. So
and we have AI solutions for that, Vincent, right?
Yeah.
For exactly what you're talking about, to solve for that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, one of my last questions, Amy, if you don't mind, what does misalignment that we talk about, on this call today, look like in daily operations within hotels?
Well, I think back to what I said just a little bit ago, where we're misdiagnosing things as more people problems than maybe looking more fully at the processes and systems that are supporting the people. So, I think daily symptoms, it's things like sales are chasing the volume, revenue is chasing rate, but is that really the right focus? Right? They're still losing market share. They're still, I think it feels a lot like friction, right? Like we're all working really hard, but we're not moving the needle. We're not seeing any motion in place. And, I hear things sitting in those rooms, both above property and at property, where it's like, whose KPI is that? Who owns this? Does the system really do that? Right? Like, still trying to figure out the technology system. Or the worst is, we've always done it this way, right? We're just going to stick to what we know and not innovate and evolve with the way, business is moving and customers are making decisions. So I think, when we tie it to technology, the tools exist, but it's like shallow adoption. The systems don't talk to each other. That's a huge problem, like integrating the systems and maybe having promises by the technology that's not really truly capable, misalignment in kind of the buying process of the technology, or even data being there, but it's not trusted, so it's not used. I see that happening a lot too. So there's just a lot of different friction points within that commercial system.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you see that misalignment as well in technology, Carlos?
A lot of times, and Amy will appreciate this because I coach baseball, played baseball for so long. If I give you 2 front tosses, I can tell you whether you can hit or not. So a lot of times, I can walk into a place, and by looking at the tech stack and asking a couple of questions, I could really see the misalignment right away. And common signs of that are a lot of times multiple systems that are doing the same thing or overlapping functions or just duplicating efforts, what we call shadow IT, right? And then we have all these manual workarounds where Excel becomes the integrating layer, or Google Sheets, right? And then departments operating in silos, right? Like, marketing doesn't talk to revenue management doesn't talk to demand gen, et cetera, ops not sharing data. So all those things are real. They happen just about a lot of places that I walk into. And so, like, tech decisions made in isolation versus alignment with the ownership goals. And a lot of things that I ask all the time is to the owner is typically, hey, is this going to be a long haul to this asset? Or are you positioning the asset to actually depart your portfolio, right? Because I need to understand, right? Are you looking to value engineer something here to dump the asset? Or we're going to have a stronghold for this that we can obviously say, hey, look, we need to invest in this because we want to take this asset from here to here, right? And so that alignment is super important. And then honestly, the result here is the team spend really a lot of time managing systems instead of driving performance. And so you don't want your leaders having to always be managing the system or working around it, when if the systems are integrated as they should, right, then they can actually help drive performance, which a lot of times they spend a lot more time working with the systems instead of driving performance and getting their people up to speed and retraining and reinforcement of the actual talent.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just wanted to pull up one of the comments that just came in on LinkedIn. And to your point, Carlos, Blanca is actually agreeing with you and saying, hey, some of these teams, they should be really remote because they handle several responsibilities. And Alexandra here, she said, Amy, I 100% or 1000% agree even, that the onboarding of these tools is so extremely important, and it's what they have to focus on, and where we see huge gaps, right? The promise versus product. And I think that comes back to what Carlos is saying as well. Like, you have several products doing the same features, and you have shadow IT coming in. So that's very well put, I think, of both of them. I think my last question will be for both of you, and starting off with Amy, I suppose. What should hotels review first to improve performance? What is the number one thing that they should be looking at right now?
Yeah, I think it's clarity first. So get the team aligned, take a step back and really say, do we have a clear commercial goal? Are we aligned with the owner's vision of this asset? And I think from, coming from a sales and marketing background, not sales and marketing leaders haven't always had a seat at the table. I think where they've maybe felt comfortable asking those questions of the asset owner, and getting involved in having those deeper discussions. And it is vital that we have those conversations and understand, so that we can work as a team with the asset owners, with the stakeholders, to ensure that that direction is met. And so agreed priorities, number one thing, and clarity.
Perfect. Awesome. Carlos, same thing. What is the single tech change or tech opportunity, I suppose, that will create the most impact for a property right now, you think?
Oh wow, I think that plays property by property, right? But I will say that don't start buying new tech yet, right? Like start again with Amy, start aligning with your current stack and your asset strategy. Meaning, the first thing I will probably do will be to, ask some questions like, does your tech stack reflect your asset class, guest profile, and revenue strategy? That will give me a lot to work with on where are we today and where do we want to go, and establish a unified data layer or integration strategy. Let's integrate first, right? There's a lot of systems that they're saying, oh, I don't like this one, or where I came from, I used to work with that one, but does it solve the problem? Number one, does it solve the problem, and does it integrate with what we got going on here? Because I always look at the PMS as the heartbeat of your property, and then everything else that comes in is kind of like your arteries. So why not get the blood flowing right into the heart, and let's figure out what's the problem, right? Because if we know that we're not able to bring some of this bloodstream from one of these systems into the PMS, well, let's figure that out. A lot of times they haven't even explored whether they have turned on the feature that they were probably already paying for. And so these are those things, right? And then in the why, right? Like enable better decision making across revenue, marketing, and operations, and unlock value from existing systems before adding cost. Let's just figure that out. Oh, you want to see this many fields over here, this many values? Well, what does your integration look like today? Are you passing all of that, or you just decided not to pass all that data? Maybe it already is there, and you just got to click, 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 and now you're having all that data. So sometimes it's that simple. But I will say this: most hotels don't need more technology. Oftentimes, they need their technology to work together.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much both for joining today. And thanks very much for the audience on being so engaged. Blanca, Alexandra, Michael, I think I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And hopefully see you guys next time. And we'll speak soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.